Hello and welcome to the Curiosity and Consciousness podcast with me, Karen Maloney. I am your host, and the intention of this podcast is to help us open our minds, get curious about ourselves, and to raise our vibration and consciousness levels. Through these conversations, we hope that you will go on an inward journey to discover the truth of who you are and to become aware of your own energy and vibration. We have the power to consciously create our lives, but we need to wake up to this fact before we can begin the process and learn the key of self-responsibility. Check out the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Acast, Castbox, or whatever platform you listen on, and please like, subscribe, and share the podcast. Leave a review, leave a rating, as this will help it to reach more people. Check out my website as well, Soul Power Light, www.soulpowerlight.com. Hello everybody, you're very welcome. It is me, Karen Maloney, and thanks for tuning in for another episode. I have another wonderful conversation for you today, and my guest is Kristen Ciccolini. But before I get into Kristen's work and her details, I just want to remind you that I have some coaching slots currently available if you are a woman who is feeling a little lost at a crossroads, feeling not worthy, not confident in yourself, lacking self-esteem, just feeling maybe anxious, fearful, consumed by your thoughts, and not being able to shift beyond that again. And if you would like a little bit of support in helping you move through this transition, please reach out, pop me an email, karen@soulpowerlight.com, and we can schedule a free call. Or feel free to pop onto my website, soulpowerlight.com. Click the Work With Me section, and from there you can book an available slot for a free chat. So I look forward to hearing from you. Then back to today's guest. As mentioned, Kristen Ciccolini is my guest, and Kristen is a Boston-based holistic nutritionist and menstrual health educator. She is also the founder of Good Witch Kitchen, and she is the creator of the Superpower Your Natural Cycle membership program. And she is the host of the podcast, The Lunar Body. Kristen helps women manage their health naturally through evidence-based nutrition and spiritual practices. Her specialities include hormone balance and menstrual health, as well as working with chronic dieters to overcome disordered thought patterns, emotional eating, and body image issues. She's been featured on CNN, Boston Magazine, Prevention, Healthline, and more. And again, this is another brilliant conversation this week, and my conversation with Kristen really centered around the hormone cycle, both the male and female hormone cycle, and menstrual health, and again the importance for us as women to tune into our menstrual cycle and what phase we're at, and knowing what that can mean for us, how we can feel during that phase, and then best supporting ourselves through it as well, even among all the commitments and work and all the things that we need to do. It was really interesting in this conversation, and Kristen certainly opened my eyes when she mentioned that in medical studies for a long time women were excluded from studies. Up until 1993 they weren't required, and even when it came to the female hormonal system they were quoted as saying that it was just too complex. And I think that's really interesting, and it was certainly a bit shocking for me as well to hear that. But in this conversation, Kristen shares loads on exactly what are hormones, and again explains more about the female hormonal system versus the male hormonal system. And when we learn a little bit more about them, we can see how the current patriarchal system really works or goes against the female hormonal cycle. Kristen explained how the male hormonal cycle is based on a 24-hour period, which is perfect for that patriarchal system of get up and go and do it all again the next day. And the female system is more on a 28-day cycle. So it takes us longer to renew. But again, the conversation is not about, women not being being in the workforce around them. But again, it's that conscious communication between the two and learning how we can best support ourselves in that system as well as it currently is, and not allow ourselves to get into that place of constant stress, which then has knock-on effects on every other hormonal system in our body. So again, a really insightful conversation. And if you would like to find out more on Kristen's work, you can go to her website, goodwitchkitchen.net. And as always, I will have all the links as well on the show notes on my website, soulpowerlight.com. So enjoy. Welcome everybody, and thanks for joining for another episode. I have another wonderful guest joining me this week. So Kristen, first of all, you're very welcome and thanks for joining today.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. I love the name of your company, Good Witch Kitchen. I think that's just such a brilliant name. And I suppose an aspect of your work as well that really interested me was menstrual health educator as well. So maybe just, and you do lots of different things as we heard in your bio, but maybe just describe a little bit about your work. First of all, what it is you do and maybe what led you to it.
Yeah. So I am a holistic nutritionist, and I started as Good Witch Kitchen in 2017. So 4 years now. Mm-hmm. And in the beginning, I wasn't too sure about which direction I should go. We all kind of start out pretty generic with, drink your water, eat your vegetables.
Yeah.
But, the more I worked with clients, the more I realized that there was an issue surrounding their period problems. And everyone seemed to think that these problems were normal and that it was something that they just had to deal with, and they plan their lives around it. And it was never like the first concern of theirs when they came to me. It was always just like, oh, I have this other thing going on. Also, I'm on the couch for a week when I get my period, and it's really terrible. But otherwise, So I saw that pattern, and I had developed more of an interest in hormone health. So I put those things together and was like, I had to figure out why is this happening? Like, why does everyone seem to think that they should be in pain every single month? And the research I dove into was pretty eye-opening, but so that's kind of where my feminism kicked in to my business. So now I really focus on educating menstruators on their cycles so they can live more freely and really harness the power that's within their cycle.
Brilliant. I love that. Harness the power within your cycle, and definitely, hopefully we'll touch on that a little more as well. But something that you mentioned as well, this idea that it's normal. Like we're just meant to be in so much pain, or it's meant to be, agony for a week every month or whatever it is, or you're meant to be really down or moody or, irritated or whatever. And I suppose, where did that normalization come from? Or when did it start to be so just accepted and like blasé and so disconnected from the actual truth?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's always kind of been accepted that women or menstruators should not feel great because they're, it hasn't really been researched as much as male hormonal cycles. And because of that, everyone just thinks, oh, well, there's nothing wrong. And there's a difference between common and normal. PMS symptoms and period pain are very, very common. Normal is another thing. When you trace it back, it's all, patriarchal roots of science and research, because that's where it all stems from, or who decides what's worthy of being studied and how that information gets into the educational system and how it trickles down. And there's a lot of bias along the way. And so, there's a big problem and it goes pretty deep. And I think it starts with the scientific institutions and who's in charge there. So there's a lot of medical research that ignores the hormonal cycles because actually in the US, researchers weren't required to include women in their studies until 1993.
I didn't know that. And, wow.
Yeah. And so that means anything before that, women's treatments for their health weren't properly tested on anyone with the female hormonal cycle, right?
Wow.
And that regulation from 1993 might seem like a big progressive step forward, but it only applied to the National Institutes of Health, which only accounts, I think, for under 10% of all clinical trials. So it's not even very well enforced either. So there's a very big problem there. I've also read and researched that they've flat out said that the female hormonal cycle is too difficult to study. So they just don't do it.
Wow.
And no one knows that, or I feel like it's very uncommon knowledge, and we just accept all of the research as it is for everyone, but it's not technically for everyone,
I'm like a little bit shell shocked at that, that women were not included in studies before 1993. Like, that is huge.
I wouldn't say they weren't fully included, but they weren't required to
be. Yeah. Okay.
1993. Yeah.
Which again, though, is a huge, like you mentioned, bias, like to eliminate so much information, because again, men and women, we are different. And I mean, just to kind of ignore it a little bit and think, oh, it's a little bit too hard, that really just, well, for me, I'm like, okay, well, that makes so much sense then really in the systems and how they've been created and filtered down. If that kind of knowledge was, not really too concerned about at the end of the day.
Yeah, and it's really interesting when you also see that even with animal studies, they're overwhelmingly using male cells. And it's just crazy how little representation there is for both sexes.
Wow. Well, thank you for enlightening us on that. And then you mentioned, the hormone cycles, and just maybe mention, first of all, hormone health. Maybe talk to it a little bit and just why it's so important for people. And then maybe you could distinguish the difference between the male and female hormone systems or cycles.
Mm-hmm. So hormones are basically chemical messengers, and they tell our body what to do, basically. And our different hormonal systems are all connected. So our stress hormones, our thyroid hormones, our sex hormones, they're all interconnected. So if there's an imbalance, you're going to feel it somewhere. So there are 4 main hormones with the menstrual cycle. And there's follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, estrogen, and progesterone. So you mainly need to know just the estrogen and progesterone, but there are 4 phases to the cycle as well, which are split into 2 halves divided by ovulation. So the first half is the follicular phase. Ovulation happens, and then there's a luteal phase. And so the follicular and luteal are divided even more into 2. So to make it simple, you start with the follicular phase, and this kind of overlaps with menstruation. So it's the beginning of your cycle. And hormones are low in this phase, and they gradually rise. Then the second half of the follicular phase is the ovulatory phase. Estrogen really begins to rise here, and that's where you're going towards ovulation. You're feeling more energized, you're feeling sexy, you're feeling, a lot more social as well. So there's a lot of these hormones. Again, they connect to so many other parts of our being, and it's not just the menstrual cycle, but it affects us. So estrogen's rising. Also, this is when that follicular stimulating hormone peaks, and that's what sort of triggers ovulation. And then the second half of your cycle begins, where estrogen drops and progesterone takes over. Progesterone is the hormone that helps you maintain a healthy pregnancy. So at this point where your body thinks there's a chance of pregnancy, this hormone's going to be high. Think of it as progestation. And this is a more calming hormone. It makes you feel more relaxed. It's a quieter time in your cycle. So where you had a ton of energy at ovulation, now it's starting to wind down a bit. And so progesterone rises and everything else sort of slows down. And then at the end of this, so there's, sorry, I should have said this starts the luteal phase, and then your menstruation begins. And then that starts the whole cycle over again. I feel like that was a lot, but if you can
good.
see it visually, it's easier to understand.
No, that's good. Thank you for sharing that again. And just again, having I'm sure a lot of people are aware, but again, for others who maybe are not, just to start to make a little bit of a conscious connection, or just to know. It's always good to know. So the female hormone cycle then, is it usually that full menstrual cycle phase, like the full 28 days or whatever it is for a person?
Yes. So anyone who menstruates has this 28-day on average. We just say that to kind of make it nice and clean.
Yeah.
But a 28-day cycle that we function on the lunar cycle. So just think of it that way. Whereas male hormonal cycle is more solar. So it cycles 24 hours. It's like Groundhog Day, same day, over and over. But our hormone cycle is a lot more nuanced. It's a lot more complex. And like I just explained, there's different peaks and valleys of all these different hormones throughout the month rather than just one day. So where a lot of us are trying to be the same person and have the same level of productivity and creativity and stamina and energy throughout the month, it's just natural that all those levels change throughout the month. And a lot of people aren't educated about this part of their cycle. Yeah. So we try to fit ourselves into that box of, the patriarchal solar cycle box. But it's just, we're working against our cycle in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I know I can definitely say, as a person going back a few years, I was clueless as to my cycle, and like that, didn't understand that, like the phases you just mentioned, I didn't know the hormones per se, but, that I was winding down and not as energized, and I'd be still trying to push and strive and be like, oh my God, what is wrong with me? Why haven't I got the oomph? And then when I learned so much, I was like, oh my God, it's literally because I'm not wired to be this way all the time. And it really shifted everything for me. And that's why I think it's so important, for people to be more aware, because like that, we're not taught this in school. We're not taught anything about our cycle other than about every 28 days, you should have a bleed type scenario. Like you say, the pains and everything that comes with it, it's all normal. But what then, because then mentioning the female cycle more connected to the lunar and then the male cycle being more 24-hour period connected to the solar, what does that then create as some of the really big differences between the two?
Well, so think about the phases of the moon. It's never always the same thing in the sky. It's always changing. So that's the way I kind of like to put it in perspective for clients is, whatever's happening in your body does not necessarily have to match up exactly with what's going on in the sky. Mm-hmm. But using the moon helps you kind of understand the energy of each phase. Mm. So the new moon it corresponds to the menstrual phase. So think about the new moon time. You don't see the moon in the sky. It's a quiet time. It's an internal time. You don't see the moon, so you're kind of inward. You're not feeling very social. So it's that kind of thing. And then as you move, the waxing moon would be the follicular phase. So as the light of the moon is growing, your energy is growing, your estrogen is growing. And then the full moon, where it's bright and it's beautiful, that's your ovulatory phase. That's when you're feeling that high peak estrogen. You're super social. You're super happy, energized, better mood, more stamina for like more higher intensity exercise. You want to be more social. And then after that is the waning moon, where things start to wind down a bit. The light is dimming a little bit. And that's your luteal phase. That's when progesterone kicks in. You're feeling more calm. You want to retreat a little bit, maybe focus on, your internal life starting a little bit more, releasing some clutter from your life. The luteal phase is kind of a release time. It's when your body begins to prepare to shed. So that's kind of how you can think about that waning moon phase as well. And then you're back to the new moon and it all starts again.
Yeah, that's a really lovely visual as well. Thank you for sharing that and connecting it to each of the moon cycles. And then what I'm thinking, I'm like, does that mean that a man goes through that in like 24 hours? Not necessarily to that level, kind of, but as in, because they can go through a phase, face, difficulty, want to retreat in part of the day, but then literally like within a 24-hour period, the next day they feel renewed again and they're like back to whatever, the light, the sun, the brightness. That's really interesting.
That's exactly it. And one thing that I read a while back that I always think about is that they do go through this moon phase in one day. But you know, that waning moon phase of the day is like happy hour for them. The waning moon or the luteal phase, it's the second half of your cycle. It's a longer period. So in the beginning, you're still feeling that like high of the estrogen. You're still feeling pretty social and energized, but it wanes as you move towards menstruation. So during the day for men, when they're, you know, like 3 o'clock on, they've got that energized part of their cycle. When they leave work at 5, it's like, no, I'm not ready to go home yet. I got to go to happy hour.
Wow.
You know, and then towards the end of the night, they start to wind down.
Wow, that is so interesting. And again, just makes so much sense. I'm sure everyone listening can be like, oh my God, yes, that makes so much sense. I have seen that pattern.
I have to go out after work now, you know?
Yeah. Oh my God, that makes so much sense. And again, it connects back to what you mentioned earlier and the systems and the patriarchy. You know, being in a corporate space or an office environment or somewhere that's high pressure, again, that makes total sense for them. Because again, if they're going through all that in 24-hour phase, they're feeling renewed and invigorated and have had their rest and their wind down and everything within that day, that they can come back and do it again and again and again and again and repeat it. That obviously for women might feel a little bit more like, oh my God, for a week or two going, I just want to chill out a bit. And it's like high pressure. No, this project, go. We need ideas. We need to create. And wow. Yeah.
Yeah, because if they can do it, why can't you? You know?
Yeah.
And this is what we've been trained to do. But because there's such a lack of education about this, or I mean, even if there was a lot of education about this in the corporate space, it'd be very difficult because it is such a male-dominated place. I think for the understanding to be there that, you know, there's just different phases for everyone. And so what it does is we try to fit ourselves into doing that and following what they're doing. And when we're working against our cycle, that creates physical stress and mental stress.
Yeah. And
that, again, all of these hormone systems are interconnected. So when you're chronically stressed, that's going to cause imbalances. That's going to bring up a lot of PMS symptoms, and stress is like the main thing. When I tell anyone for any PMS symptoms or any issues with hormones, the very first thing is like, how stressed are you?
Yeah.
I mean, your body is designed to deal with stress first. It's its main priority because, you know, if you think of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, safety is like number one.
Yeah.
So what happens is when your body is so focused on dealing with the stress, because it prioritizes those hormones, it shuts everything else down. Like everything else is in the back burner, your thyroid, your sex hormones, and all that. Because if your body perceives that it's not a safe environment, like having a baby is a very resource intensive process. Your body is not going to put any energy in that way. You know, you need all your resources to deal with the stress.
Yeah, it's so true. Like, you know, that shutting down, as you mentioned, when we go into stress. And like, I'm curious to know, how would the system look from your perspective to bring into awareness the female cycle as well? Because obviously it's not about, oh, the corporate space is not for women, because some women love it and they thrive in it. And, you know, that's fine, each to their own. But it's the absolute ignorance to it, and like you say, that having to fit in, and you know, this is the only way, that's where it causes the issues. And I know for me as well, once I even had the awareness of my cycle and how my hormones went, even I could bring that knowledge with me to work. When I was in the corporate space, you'd be like, oh yes, it's this time of month, okay, I'm just going to be a little bit easier on myself. I'm really just going to focus on the priorities and get this done, and you know, the non-essential I can wait for tomorrow if I'm feeling too tired or whatever it is. Like, I had that awareness to work with it. Whereas, like you say, when that education is totally lacking, it's very difficult in the first place. So what for you, like in an ideal world, what would, and as an educator, what would be the scenario that would help women as well really thrive in that space, but also taking into awareness and consciousness their cycle? How would that look?
I love what you said about, you know, you understanding that and kind of adapting to your space, because not every corporate space is going to be like, oh, you can't schedule this meeting till you're ovulating. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, without getting to that level of conversation, you know, per se.
I mean, ideally, especially if it's a women-dominated company. I mean, there's a lot of female spaces now. I think it would be amazing to have this incorporated and to have this knowledge going through and just working. It's kind of like working with each other's different strengths. You know, if you have a diverse group of people, everyone brings something different. Same thing with this, you know, everyone could be in a different stage. They're bringing something different. So maybe you have someone in the luteal phase where it's all about, you know, evaluation, assessment, organizing, you know, maybe they're managing the meeting while someone else who maybe in their ovulatory phase is feeling really super creative. Maybe they're the brainstorming person that week. You know, it would be so cool if we could organize workplaces like this and just, you know, be sensitive to where people are.
I think in a women-dominated company, that could potentially be something that could happen. Like, why not? Like that, when you have the information and the education, the awareness, and bringing it into just how you work. And again, like you say, working to everyone's strengths. I think that's absolutely possible. But again, how would it work? Or I'm more curious as well, in the male-dominated system as it is at the moment, what would that need to look like? Or how could it be incorporated there?
Yeah. So more realistically, I mean, it's exactly what you said. It's just adapting. So understanding where you are is going to be super important, because when you don't understand where you are, you don't know where you are in your cycle. And it's just kind of like banging your head against the wall. It's going to be stressful. But when you do understand what's happening in your body, you can have more compassion for yourself and you can adjust what you're doing accordingly. So even if you can't change anything at work, it would be great if you were able to organize things based on your energy level, creativity, whatever. That's awesome, and you should do it. But oftentimes we aren't able to do that. We have obligations, and you know, our boss needs this, and we have to go to that meeting. And so what you can do otherwise, get your stuff done at work, but outside of work, focus on where you are in your cycle and honor where you are in your cycle, your energy, what kind of self-care you need. And if you're looking at your week and you realize it's completely out of alignment at work, then you kind of know that outside of that, you can double up on self-care, and you just really try to balance it out a little bit, because aligning with your cycle everywhere else is going to help you adapt to the things that don't align. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's so true. And really, that awareness is key to know where you are in cycle. And still to this day, I forget sometimes. And next thing, I'm in this constant, like that stress, that striving, that pushing, and I'm feeling extra tired. And next thing, and I'm in it without even realizing. And then I catch myself and I'm like, oh, hang on, what date is it? Where am I? And then I'm like, okay, right, yes. And like you say, that compassion then is huge, and it shifts everything. And I believe as well, if more women did have that consciousness going into work and doing their work, like for me and everything as well, I could adapt and be more flexible. But also in the long term, or in the bigger scale, I think there would be less of that high intensity stress and burnout. And kind of being off sick with stress. I mean, yes, that can happen, but I think having that awareness and being able to adapt to it would eliminate some of that as well.
Yeah, I agree. And when people start to learn more about their body and pay a little bit more attention, it's like it opens up so much more opportunity and so much more space, mental clarity. You're not so focused on feeling so miserable all the time, because you understand what's going on and know how to adapt accordingly. So it's really, I love when people start to learn about this, because I get so excited for them.
Yeah, it's so super important. Like that, learning about our bodies, that has been such a huge shift for me. Even my cycle, and just generally my body, my energy, where are my thoughts, because that it's been such a game changer. Because like that, we can tune in and be like, oh, right, okay. And like that, shift that awareness, bring more compassion, or add a little bit more self-care, or give myself that 20-minute power nap or whatever to recharge, to move through that phase and transition. So it's really, really important. I love in your work as well that, well, obviously in helping women who are suffering with maybe extreme PMS or pains or fertility issues or whatever multitude of issues that arise, from irregular cycles. And I know you're obviously a holistic health coach as well, a nutritionist, and the nutrition aspect is huge. But I love that you bring in spiritual practices as well and mindfulness. And I'm wondering, why was that important for you as well?
Well, I mean, it's part of my personal life, my spirituality. And I did want to start to bring more of that into my business because I found it so beneficial for myself. And especially because I bring in a lot of the lunar work. Mm-hmm. It's just, I feel like it all ties in, right? And to help people kind of understand the energies of each phase, I think that focusing on more spiritual work is really helpful. And so something I do, and so I have a membership program, and what we'll do is we'll have a new moon circle, and, you know, every moon phase, I'll put out recipes or a recommended ritual to try to sort of embody that phase. Mm-hmm. That way, even if there's so much else going on in your life, at least there's like these touch points throughout the month where you could be like, okay, now this is the time to align with my cycle. And I think, you know, spirituality, it's known to help decrease stress when you're really paying attention to it or practicing it in whatever way that looks like for you. But for me, it is very focused on lunar living.
Amazing. I love that. And yeah, I think even in my own journey when, you know, there was all this personal development I was doing for years and really got it and loved it or whatever, but it really wasn't until I did the spiritual development alongside it that everything really started to click. Because like you're saying, it's just that more connecting to self and the other energies to create that space to be more in tune and in communication with ourselves. And it really just shifted everything. And I love that you do little rituals and circles. And what other kind of practices have helped you maybe on your journey that you've used, that you still use, that don't necessarily have to be connected to the moon, that maybe might help others who are listening and curious about developing some practices?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, most of it I feel like is connected to the moon because I do like to honor the moon phases in different ways. But I think more so, I just try to focus on it rather than like following any particular specific regimen. I really do try to focus on where I am in my cycle and just thinking about, okay, what do I feel today? Like just first of all, like, am I in the mood for exercise? If so, what kind of exercise am I in the mood for? I feel like things like that are really helpful. It's not necessarily a ritual or spiritual, but it is thinking about how you feel and how you want to feel. And
it's that more mindful awareness. And for people who maybe don't do that like that, it's always nice to give ideas, because if it's very new for someone, they're kind of like, well, I don't know where to start. So even that mindful awareness, like asking yourself, what would I like to do? What do I feel like today? How do I feel today? And just getting curious and allowing yourself to explore in that way. Or, you know, do you want to go sit outside in nature? Do you want to like listen to a guided meditation? I think it's always just allowing yourself, again, that curious relationship with yourself and to be guided, because it's those little steps, I think, that just it will lead you to where you want to go or need to go, because like that, it is that higher awareness and communication with self.
Yeah. And one thing you can try is like, sometimes I'll tell people to do this, is just spend a day like just getting curious about your decisions and what the motivation is behind them. Are you making a decision because it's something you think you need to do, or something someone else told you to do? Are any of your decisions because you actually want to do it? So even things, you know, like the exercise, like we just talked about, are you trying to follow a routine that, you know, some celebrity was doing? Or are you eating this food because you saw on Instagram that like a skinny person was eating it? You know, like any of these just small decisions too, like what route you take to work or what music you're listening to, just thinking about, why am I doing this? And what do I actually want to do? Does that align? And then that I find gets you a little bit closer to, you know, listening to your intuition. Is just having a conversation with yourself. And when you do that, when you practice that, asking yourself, are these decisions coming from me? That really, I feel like that helps you trust your intuition a little bit more.
Yeah, totally. Love that. And it is just that beginning, like looking at what you're doing, why you're doing it, that like you say, that curious mind really can open up lots of exciting, intuitive knowings and guidance. Really insightful conversation and lots of really powerful information as well that you've shared. And obviously with 2020, the year that it was, and all the shifts and things that were happening, what do you think are some key ideas or takeaways or things to keep in mind going forward as we kind of, well, for me, I'm like, we're building the new. You know, a lot of the old is crumbling. Like, yes, it's still there, but we're in a shifting time. So what do you think are some of the important key things for us all to bear in mind as we go forward?
Yeah, I think 2020 was definitely a year of crumbling structure, right? You know, everything that wasn't working, we found out, you know? Yeah. So I think moving through this year, just thinking about the last year and what wasn't working for you and what didn't feel good. Again, like asking yourself why you were doing these things if they weren't feeling good, and then just trying to make decisions from here on out that are serving you. And I think, I don't know, when you were saying that, the first thing that came to mind, I mean, since we're talking about menstrual cycles, is really maybe moving forward, start paying attention to more of that. The simplest thing you could do is just write down a word for how you feel every day. And that can show you some patterns. And especially if you don't want to get into like tracking everything every single day, at least starting to see a pattern for how you feel can be really helpful. So, you know, building up a new structure for yourself with the new habits and new understanding of yourself I think that would be a good place to go.
Yeah, amazing. I love it. And yeah, just even a word, because sometimes as well, like you mentioned, the tracking, you know, sometimes, well, I know it was me, I felt like I had to go all in and like made it so overwhelming for myself that I just never did it. So I love that, like just even a word, just a simple check-in. It really is kind of the segue, and just allow it to unfold naturally. Like make it really easy for yourself and enjoyable. Like that's the key as well. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you as well for sharing so much wonderful information today. And please share where people can find out more information on your work.
Yeah, you can find me at goodwitchkitchen.net, and I am very active on Instagram. I'm at goodwitchkitchen.
Amazing. And as always, I'll link them on the show notes. And Kristen, just thank you so much for educating all us women who have been cut off from our bodies and our cycles and our inner knowings. And I just wish you all the best.
Yes, thank you. This is a great conversation. I love talking to you. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you get notified every time a new show is released. Get more information on this week's guest as well on my website www.soulpowerlight.com.